Welcome to Stop Overthinking, the podcast for overthinkers, people pleasers, and perfectionists who want to feel calm and confident enough to handle whatever life sends your way. I'm your host, Kristen Odegaard, a women's life and mindset coach, lifelong educator, and recovering perfectionist. Welcome back to the Stop Overthinking podcast. We're going to have a little different spin today, and I am going to be talking with Chris Peterson, otherwise known as the parenting professor, who is a facilitator of Love and Logic. So we're going to talk about parenting and some of the mindset shifts that need to occur when you are parenting your kids, but also I have found Love and Logic, it works on all relationships, really, not just parenting relationships. So if you're not a parent, stay with us. I'm sure that you will find some insight on today's episode as well. So welcome, Chris. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and Love and Logic?
Well, gosh, that's such a hard question because, I way back in 1999, I got my very first teaching job out on the West Coast. And I won't drag out the story, but I had a student tell me very eloquently what he was going to do to me and with extensive bodily harm. And my tactic was to point at his chest and say, "You can't talk to me that way." Because that's how we kind of parent, how or we reflect how we've been worked with or parented. And he pushed my hand away and said some choice words. And I realized as I'm crying at the end of the day that I need some better skills. Just being able to teach a great lesson isn't enough. And I can honestly say it was the first time I actually went to the library intentionally on purpose, and I started studying about Love and Logic. Love and Logic's been around since 1977. Jim Fay and Foster Cline wrote the book that I wish I would have, and multiple books since then. As time went on, Dr. Charles Fay, Jim's son, has taken over things, and he's the PhD behind everything and why it works. And it's just the philosophy of raising kids. The love part allows kids to make mistakes and grow through those mistakes. The logic piece allows the children to live and with the consequences of their choices. And that's really what parenting is about, is allowing kids to make mistakes when the costs are really small so that they can start to build that cause and effect part of the brain instead of just kind of reacting from the brainstem amygdala stuff. We don't want to get into brain stuff already. Kristen, ask me some more questions.
I talk about brain stuff all the time, so
okay, all right,
all
good.
That unusual for this group, but we can save that for.
And then the parenting professor thing, that was just an accident, kind of. So I was teaching here, full time when I moved back to Wisconsin, and my youngest was born 17 years ago, and we realized that one of us is going to stay home. And since I was the teacher, financially, it made more sense for me to stay home, and because we don't have family near here, and so I stayed home and started, being the only dad in these moms groups, and started, reflecting on how I was a lot more successful using Love and Logic strategies in the classroom. And then how do we transfer those to home? And the transfer was pretty easy. And I was doing an interview on a local radio station, and Z93, do you remember Marco?
Yeah.
And he's going on, and it was supposed to be 2 minutes, and he's like, "Hey, we got to take a quick break, but will you stick around and come back and we'll talk some more?" We ended up talking for a long time, and it was like a small little therapy session, and we're live on the radio, and he's like, "Gosh, Chris, you're like the parenting professor." And I'm like, "Oh, I like that." I jotted that down. And then that's kind of how this took off. And then Bree came, and as the kids got older and in school full time, I kind of let the reins on this go. And I'm blessed to be able to travel and speak and work with, I don't know if you've noticed, but I talk a lot, work with parents and educators and administrators all over the nation now. So I'm really happy to be talking with you today. All right, your turn. Go.
Very good. And I actually became aware of Love and Logic and met Chris in 2014, so nine years ago, when I went through one of his parenting classes, and it was in the Methodist Church basement in Onalaska, and so had my introduction then. And I was out of the classroom at that point, but using it as a, parenting philosophy. And then my son several years later was diagnosed with ADHD and having some issues at school, and I had the opportunity, I think it was in like 2016, to go see Dr. Charles Fay in person on a one-day sort of session, and he was talking more about using Love and Logic in the schools. And I thought, this is awesome, I can use it at home. But then I went and did the training to be a facilitator, focusing again on some of the classroom aspects that I do in my day job then as well, and so have offered that to educators. So Chris and I have worked together with educators back and forth, and it's been years. But one of the things, go ahead.
Well, you bring up a great word there, philosophy, and in education especially, but in a lot of things, we have like these systems, right? And systems are just, I feel like systems are too rigid and they're too cookie cutter. And I don't know about you, but kids don't like break the rules perfectly, do they?
No.
They have nuance to it. And they're like, well, I actually wasn't running, I was speed walking. And
Yeah.
those kids, Kristen, you were never that child, I'm sure, but
No, never.
I know a kid that might have been like that. And they get into these great debates, and Love and Logic gives us just some fundamental principles. And that's why I love it. It's a set of principles that allows us to be a lot more effective and efficient with young people, not get sucked into those power struggles that no one ever wins. Utilizes like just a huge ton of empathy, shared control. I jotted a couple things down.
Yeah.
Sharing control with children, setting firm limits with a lot of love and empathy over anger, frustration, lectures. And it's just it's a someone sent me a really nice message yesterday. I think you saw it. I posted it, and it was the perfect description of what Love and Logic is, because I was on this national group, Facebook group thing, and
so it is a philosophy, and that's one of the things that I talk a lot of times with people with, is just kind of the mindset shifts, because we are in one set of thoughts, one type of philosophy. I refer to it with my clients kind of as your instruction manual, like here's the way things should go. And when it doesn't, then that's when you're getting frustrated and angry and disappointed or all those other things. But all of us were raised to some extent or another by other adults, and that a lot of times is our experience with parenting. And so you take that philosophy, those set of beliefs, and that gets integrated into your parenting and your relationships. And I know for my generation, empathy in terms of like punishments or consequences, that it wasn't that my parents didn't have empathy at certain times, but I wouldn't have said that was something that I could recognize, or that it even was brought into my consciousness when going. It was more about, that wasn't what I necessarily wanted to do, but I didn't know any other ways to go about it. And
and how would you?
Right.
Just like, any other skill, any other, my wife works in medicine. My dad was in road construction. My brother's a police officer. And those are all great, important things. Whether you're a plumber or you're picking rock with the farmer next door, it takes some learning, right? Some more than others, but it's funny, this thing called parenting, which I think most of us could argue is the most important job on the planet. We leave the hospital with maybe a brochure about breastfeeding, and then it's like, all right, good luck. And I remember 17 years ago, my wife and we left the hospital, and she works in women's health, and I was an educator and coached and taught many kids, and was already starting to do some of this parent education piece. And I just remember freaking out and being like, what do we do with this thing? I don't know. What are we going to do? And, we kind of learn along the way, but Love and Logic, I always joke, I got to practice and make mistakes on thousands of other people's kids and learn some styles and techniques. And honestly, Kristen, I'm still learning, because when my stress level is high, I can feel that finger coming out like it did 24 years ago, and it's hard to unlearn those things. maybe we should have some sessions where you can help me unlearn some of those negative cycles and negative spirals. But
Yeah.
it takes a village. All these cliches are true because there's truth in them. And for me, I tried to find loopholes in Love and Logic for years, and finally it was my wife that said, why don't you just embrace it? Because obviously you're way less stressed and you're way more successful with kids.
Yeah.
So I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. We mentioned empathy as being one of the core tenets of Love and Logic. And can you explain a little bit like how that works
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
where it comes into play?
Well, the key thing to remember, I think, with empathy is that most of us, like you mentioned, weren't raised with true, authentic empathy. A lot of it was wrapped in a big veil of sarcasm.
Yeah.
Oh, you hurt your finger again. See, well, if I told, and then it slips into that. If you just listen to me, I've told you 1,000 times, and that's not being empathetic. That's being critical. And that's not the best way to lead in these situations. So every strategy and technique, whether we're talking about delaying the consequence or a technique called guiding kids to own and solve their problems, or remember the uh-oh song for when kids are really little, and all of these strategies always open with a strong dose of sincere empathy. And we in class, I'm pointing over to a big stack of workbooks, but class 2 is when we learn and find our empathetic phrase, and we go through a little activity. In the classroom, I started with bummer. Bummer. Right. And I had sticky notes all over my classroom that had the word bummer on it. And that was a reminder to me to open with empathy. Mr. Peterson, I forgot my project. Oh, bummer. Right. And when we open with empathy, it calms both of us down.
Yeah.
Right. It keeps us from, for sure, it keeps us from driving that child to that primitive, brainstem mode, the fight or flight, flee or fawn response, and keep them more in that decision making, cause and effect thinking part of the brain. Because learning doesn't happen in that primal brain. So if we want to teach something to kids, and we choose to slip up and yell or get frustrated or angry or lecture, we shut the learning. Right.
Yeah.
Anger and frustration shuts the learning. Empathy opens that door to learning. So empathy is key. Then when my kids were little, I changed from bummer to this is so sad. Oh, this is so sad. And that's the third time your toothbrush fell in the toilet. This is so sad. And it keeps me calm too, because like you said, we need to shift from a punitive approach where we take things personally. I call it the Q-tip, right? Quit taking it personally.
Yeah.
Right. Quit taking it personally,
Yeah.
and start looking at these opportunities, as hard as it is, but looking at them as gifts, because we need our kids to make thousands and thousands of mistakes. Again, when the cost is small, it's because now that I have 2 teenagers in the house, the risks are much bigger.
Yeah.
And they have so much history of making little mistakes, and they start to develop this little voice in their head that says, how is this next decision going to affect my life, versus who's going to be mad if I get caught?
Yeah.
And what do you want for your kids?
Right. And sometimes I find that people, I mean, we've talked about genuine empathy, and it's like when you're struggling and your kid has screwed up, whatever the age is, or your partner or your coworker or whoever, like how do you find that genuine empathy? How do you explain that to your clients?
Yeah, well, it's not easy in every situation. About 3 years ago, I ran for school board, and I was elected to school board. And I find empathy with kids to be easier for me personally. I have a hard time sometimes finding empathy for adults, because there's part of me that wants to just be like, you should know better than this. So it's been a good lesson for me, and
Yeah.
in learning, kind of like when we teach kids about bullying. When people come to us and we want to just fire back because we have mirror neurons, right? Oh, here we go, brain stuff. And if someone comes at me hot and angry, it's easy to reflect that back. And we just we have to learn. We have to learn, and it takes practice. It takes a ton of practice. Honestly, I kind of joke about sticky notes, but I had them all over.
Yeah.
It just helped remind me. I'm sure you did too, remember?
Oh, I
Yep.
love sticky notes. I have them everywhere.
And I
Uh,
just have these phrases ready. And so during the classes, we learn a strategy or two, or a philosophy or two, or a principle or two, and then we get to practice it. Excuse me. We get to practice it all week. We don't learn everything at once. It's kind of like saying, hey, this weekend we're going to learn all of math. Oh my gosh, it would be way overwhelming. And I guarantee you by Sunday, you would hate math. It wouldn't be any fun. So we learn it in small chunks. And the very first thing we learn first is how to not get into power struggles and arguments with kids. And then we learn the power of empathy. And finding your phrase, to answer your question, find your phrase. I knew a guy in Texas. Oh, dang. Oh, dang. That was his empathetic phrase. He just had it ready to go. Kid would come to, Dad, Dad. Oh, dang. Sometimes he's like, it didn't even fit. But I just knew. I start everything with, oh, dang.
mhm.
Not when things are going great, but when you have to quote unquote parent, right? The verb.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
practice, find your phrase, sticky notes, and then stick with it.
I've found too, my kids now, I've got a 16-year-old, Megan will be 13 in a couple weeks. And
Wow.
so that curiosity is one that, like, a feeling I think that gets overlooked for a lot of things. But when I can remember, like, what are they thinking about that's putting them into this situation, or what must be going on in their mind that this made sense. And sometimes there is no answer other than they're a teenager and they weren't thinking, or whatever. When I'm having a hard time finding empathy, that I've been able to kind of train myself, like, just to ask kind of like curious questions, like, what would this be like? How do I get there? And yeah, and sometimes it's a process and you forget and you just hop back on. But yeah, I just do that sound effect.
Yeah, right.
It's one thing, like, and that it's almost like a response to my brain now, like, okay, and it gives me a moment to just think of what am I going to say next?
Right.
Where are we going? And to be able
Like
to
empathetic
listen.
yoga.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, I
Yeah.
say that a lot too. Oh, man. Because and honestly, now that I kind of think about this some more, when I was younger, when the kids were younger, kids are like hardwired, right, to push and manipulate their world, just figure out what does that taste like? What does that feel like? What does that look like? What does that smell like? And they also start thinking, what might happen if I do this? What will the big people in the room do if I do this? And they're trying to figure out their world, and it's all super duper necessary to develop healthy brains and healthy views and visions and philosophy. We're helping children develop their own philosophy of the world, their own personal worldview.
Yeah.
And if we think of it from the 40,000-foot view of doing that, we realize that a lot of these things have to happen. And if we see them as gifts for learning, and truly gifts for all of us. I learned so much being a parent. I've learned that I don't parent really well if I stay up too late watching the Packer game with some buddies. I don't have as much patience and empathy the next morning. I said something. You said something. Help me out here. Get me back on.
Oh, we were just how to shift into empathy when you're having a hard time finding that. But
Yeah.
but knowing your limits is, what you just mentioned too. Like, what do you need to be able to show up as, the person you want to be? And
Well, and I
another
remember
team.
I do remember I got the train back on the tracks there. I remember thinking with empathy, I kind of felt bad for or sorry for myself, and it's a weird thing because I'd be sitting, reading or having a cup of coffee and watching the news, and then something would happen over here, and I'd think, oh, this is so sad, right? And I wasn't really talking to them. I was talking to myself. Like, oh, this is so sad. I'm gonna have to get up and do something. And that just kind of helped me. And you notice my tone is everything's kind of waterfall, right?
Mhm.
Oh, this is so sad. And my face expresses not anger and frustration, because I could say, this is so sad. That's very different.
Mhm.
And really that's the umbrella under which love and logic resides, is that language and tone shapes reality. Not
Yes.
only the stuff that we say out loud into the ethos of the world, but what we say to ourselves. And Kristen, I know you spend so much time on that self-talk.
Yes.
And
Yes.
what connections, I'm turning into the interview, what connections do you make with that self-talk and effective parenting and love and logic?
I think it's, again, kind of little shifts of changing your philosophy. And for me, it goes deeper too. And I mentioned, kind of the person I want to be. A lot of the times when I'm coaching with people, we talk about, what are your values? What are your priorities? Like, how do you want to show up in the world? And you can really hone that in and talk about, like, what kind of parent do I want to be? Do I want to be kind and empathetic and fun, or do I want to be short-tempered, impatient, crabby?
Mhm.
And most people are going to say no to that second part. But when you look at the reality of, like, work and life and all the other things, like, how are you really showing up? And so part of that for me was just really honing in, like, what kind of parenting do I want to do? And what do I need to do? It's not so much about my kids just listening better
Right.
or behaving differently, because, hey, they're kids, but how do I want to do this? And then what do I need to get there? And so that's reminding myself to be curious, to be empathetic, to
Sure.
remember that they're learning and growing and have never been kids before. And I've never,
Yeah.
like, a lot of these parenting situations I'm figuring out. I've never had a 13-year-old girl before that is coming up. So for me was just really kind of taking a look at my own stuff and what I was willing to let go of, in terms of what other people do, or the whole comparison thing that you
Oh,
see about other people, how other people are parenting or how their kids are behaving. And for me, just really focus on me, because that's what I control. And
yep.
how do I want to do this? Whether it's love and logic or anything else, just sometimes you still need to remind yourself, but
Well,
that's
that's why I teach this stuff. Because
right.
if I don't keep teaching it, I know I'll like slip back into being, kind of the drill sergeant
Hmm.
style. And we talk about those, helicopter parents. And
Yeah.
what was the newest one? Were you telling me about the what did someone say? Lawnmower parents and snowplow parents, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, kind of helicopter, all of that. And then there's the drill sergeant. And then somewhere in the middle, there's like where Love and Logic resides, and that's, yeah, being a consultant and
Yeah.
true leading, right?
Hmm.
Leading the family, leading kids, allowing kids, again, to make mistakes when the cost is small so that they can, again, develop that little voice in their head that says, how is this going to affect my life? And you bring up all these great points. I My brain's like spinning like crazy.
There's a lot of overlap between, what we do.
There is so much overlap, and I love what you get to do too. And I send a lot of parents to you from all
Yes.
over, and
Yes. I've
I
had a
know
few clients
you
from you. Yes.
yeah, and I know you do as well. And I think,
Mhm.
that's what we have to do is really, and it's not like I mean, I think we're friends, but we don't hang out or we don't cross each other's paths hardly ever. But we just need to, like, model supporting each other. There times when I'm like not making any money where I'm like, oh, I gotta snatch some more clients, or, but that's not there's not enough of us to go around anyway.
Mhm.
So let's bolster and help and support each other, and make a difference. How did I want to show up? I remember as a young teacher, I wanted to be, after my life was threatened. I'm
Yeah.
so glad that happened early on. I'm glad that it didn't get bad, but
Mhm.
um, I wanted to be able to handle the toughest kids without breaking a sweat. And I
Yeah.
wanted them to learn, Mr. Peterson is, um, firm, but loving at the same time.
Yeah.
And I wanted those kids to want to be around me.
Hmm.
And then that kind of just morphed. So to answer your question, that's how I wanted to show up in the schools. And then what did that change at home? Not really, because I wanted to let my own kids know, right? Important job of parenting, that basically I wanted to send the message to them. Your life is yours. I can control a little bit of it, but not much, right? We can't control what are the big things? We can't control input, right?
Yeah.
What kids eat. We
Yeah.
can't control output, potty training, and we can't control what sticks between the ears, and that's like that learning piece. But
Mhm.
though, aren't those about the top three frustrations of parents?
For sure.
And I want them to start thinking, I want them to develop this voice in their head that says, my life is better. My life is more fun. My life is happier. As they're getting older, we start hearing the words fulfilled, fulfilling, when I make great choices.
Yeah.
And that I see that as my job. How do I create an environment where they real, and it's not easy, it's frustrating, but we learn about it in these classes.
Just tell me a little bit about about that process and how you teach it. Because people who aren't familiar with Love and Logic, I think that's
Sure. Well, I think,
a cool
like you
tool.
said, there's got to be a little bit of philosophical shift. We
Mhm.
have to look at mistakes not as not taking them personally, or, oh, will you stop doing that? But, and that's kind of that punitive mindset, and look at them as gifts and opportunities for learning. Charles Fay will call them SLOs, significant learning opportunities. And some of them are just small and some of them are big. I remember Grace when she was in second grade. We went out when the bus was supposed to come, and sure enough, she came off the bus and she comes running across the street, and I noticed she doesn't have her boots on. And she was like, "Hey, Dad." I'm like, "How was your day?" And I wanted to be like, "Where are your boots? I know, yeah, you should what, right?"
Mhm.
And I was, thankfully, that morning or that afternoon, I was feeling pretty good. I must have had a little small nap when Bree went down, and
Yeah.
later on, I hear, "Dad, Dad." I'm like, "Yeah, sweetie, what do you need?" She's like, "How much are boots?" I'm like, "Oh, why would you ask?" See, in our house, we say crazy things like, "Sweetie, winter's coming. We buy the first hat and the first pair of mittens and the first pair of boots." And I'm sending the message of what?
That they're responsible for them. Yeah.
Yeah, if you lose them, that no problem, but you'll have to find another. You'll have to replace them. And is that a good skill to have?
Mhm.
I think that's appropriate skill, and
Yep.
it fits our value system. So anyway, I'm like, I tried to inject a little bit of humor. I'm like, "They're $200." She's like, "What?" I'm like, "Well, you could find some probably cheaper." I'm like, "Why do you want to buy boots?" She's like, "Dad, I went to school with boots. I didn't come home with boots." I'm like, "Oh, and here's empathy again. Oh, this is so sad. And you lost your boots." She's like, "Yeah, can we go get some tonight? I think I have enough money." And she's counting quarters and dollars and birthday money. And actually I couldn't. And I remember that was a Tuesday night, and I had a meeting or something, and I couldn't. She's like, "But Dad, if I don't have boots, I can't play with my friends at recess." Okay. Is that a logic natural consequence?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so every part of me wanted to be like, "Oh, let's just go get some boots," but I thought, "Well, this is a significant learning opportunity." So I said, "Well, I can't tonight." And then I kind of went into this 5 steps. We learned this in the last class. 5 steps, or class 5, excuse me. 5 steps to guiding kids to own, keyword there, own and solve their problems. And so a lot of empathy. "Oh, this is so sad." And then I went to step 2. And I asked her, "What do you think you're gonna do?" And she's like, "Well, I thought we could go get boots." "Yeah, that's not gonna work, honey. I'm sorry. That's such a bummer." And she's like, "Well, I don't know." And I said, "Well," and then here's step 3. "Would you like to hear what some kids have tried?" And notice I use the phrase "some kids." If I say, "Well, here's what you ought to do," now Grace probably at second grade, she probably wouldn't have pushed back very much. But do you know some kids that might? "Don't tell me what to do." Or they
Mhm.
might not say it, but they'll just dig in their heels because I'm not going to listen to you. You think you're so smart. So I said, "Well, would you like to hear what some kids have tried?" And she's like, "I guess so." And I said, "Well, some kids go back to school." And with a second grader, I kind of give them the visual with my
Yeah.
fingers. I said, "Some kids go back to school and right away in the morning, they go check the lost and found." And then I asked this question, how do you think that would work? Do you see how we're starting to practice cause and effect? Here's what some kids do. How would that work for you? "Well, I could, but I don't think." And okay, well, some kids, just plan ahead and figure out how much money they're going to need, and then see if mom or dad can take them a different night to go get boots. "Well, how would that work for you?" "Well, then I'm going to miss recess, and we've been building this fort." And oh man, that's such a bummer. This is so sad. And lots of empathy throughout. And then I kind of close it with, "Hey, I think you can figure this out. Good luck. If anyone can figure this out, it's you. And what message do I send when I say that?
Yeah, that they can solve their own problem.
Yeah. Every part of me wants to be like, let's go buy boots.
Mm-hmm.
And if we do that, what's the message?
I'll fix it and I'll rescue you.
I'll
Yeah. And
rescue you.
you can't figure it out.
And you're not smart enough to figure this out, right?
Yeah.
So it was hard, but that next morning, and both girls have had hundreds of situations like this, and people are like, well, I don't have that much time. And I get that. I get that. But when I tell the story, it takes a little bit longer, but it was really quick. And here's the thing. I wanted to spend that time when the kids were younger. And this is selfish for me because I want to parent harder when I'm younger. Now that I'm pushing 50, I don't want to have to parent as hard, and
Yeah.
it's different when the kids are older, but I have a little less energy and I just have things that I want to do for me. And I don't solve kids' problem. In fact, just yesterday on the way home, Bree had a problem or something came up and I said, well, why don't you do this? And she looked at me like, huh? And I'm like, oh, well, that's not love and logic, is it?
Yeah.
I go, how about I stop nagging you? She's like, that'd be great. So Grace went off to school again and she had a plan.
Yeah.
And now it's Wednesday. And she came off of that bus and guess what was on her feet?
She found her boots, huh?
She didn't. She still had shoes on. And I thought,
Okay.
oh no. So she's like, Dad, I still can't find my boots. They're not anywhere. I'm like, well, what did you try? And I took her back through that little 5-step process again. And she went back Thursday with a plan. Thursday night or Thursday afternoon after school, she came back, still no boots. And I thought, oh, she's like, can we just go and buy boots? And I'm like, oh, honey, we're not going to be able to do that until the weekend. She's like, what? Friday rolls along. And now all this while I'm emailing her teacher who has taken a Love and Logic class with me. And I'm like, please don't bail her out. Please don't bail her out. Let her figure this out. I think she's got it. And I remember the teachers just replying with a big thumbs up, like, thank you, thank you, thank you for not making this because it's her problem.
Yeah.
And when we slip up and own our kids' problems, we send some very powerful messages like, you're not capable. You can't do this without mom or dad's, stepping in. And are there times when we have to? Absolutely. The kind of the catchphrase is when it's life or limb, we step in.
Mm-hmm.
But being uncomfortable and standing by the wall for recess isn't life or limb. Is it uncomfortable? Yeah. Does it tug at my heartstrings? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But it fit our value system, and it's something that we called an affordable consequence. So Friday rolls around, she comes ripping off the bus, running across the road, and she's like skipping and pointing at her feet. She's like, Dad, I found my boots. And Bree is like, yes! And we're just having this party at the end of the driveway. And she was so happy. And she's like, and Thomas. And I'm like, yeah. And well, he went home sick Wednesday and he grabbed my boots because we had the same pair of like black boots from Farm and Fleet or something. Yeah. So he had been sick and he's like, by the way, he was like puking sick. So we should probably spray these. And, but why was she so excited, Kristen?
Because she figured it out and she didn't have to buy boots, but she figured it out.
Yeah, she didn't have to buy boots, and she had the gift of learning and figuring it out. And if we can refrain from bailing our kids out all the time or getting angry and frustrated and commanding and demanding and allow the world to kind of work where we can be a consultant and guide kids to own and solve their problems, we build there's no guarantees, right? But we up the odds for sure that we build strong adults, because what we're raising are adults. And when kids can figure out how to solve their own problems, man, they're close. They're already, if they could just do that. Right.
Well, and that's such a gift. I mean, because so many of the adults that I'm working with too, and they've been molded where they're doubting themselves to be able to solve their own problems, and whether it's falling into people-pleasing patterns or just life has shifted. And I think it's such a gift to be able to do that for yourself and model it to your kids, but then to set that foundation for your kids so that they aren't, slipping into some of those same traps where they, don't need to crowdsource opinions and can, it's just a great skill. And I love being able to offer that to my kids. Is it perfect? Do they always make the right decisions? No. Do I sometimes still step in where I shouldn't? Yeah, probably. But
well, we got to give ourselves a lot of grace too. This parenting thing is so hard and so challenging, and in the world is just ripping by at an incredible pace that is worrisome on some level. And we think about technology and all of those things. And so we talk about it candidly. And the cool thing with the Love and Logic Institute is that they provide so much support. And through newsletters. And I think that's what a lot of people like about taking my classes. Once you're kind of in with the gang, the group, the people that have taken the class, I'm still available. And I can still keep up. So if you have an issue or need a quick reminder, people text and call me or email me. And sometimes we set up a Zoom. Sometimes it's just a quick text, read page 19. Your answer is right there. You got it. Good luck. And that's the kind of the personal part of the service side of this, because the best of us need help and reminders. Because when we're in it, when we're up to here in it, it's hard to be like, well, oh, now I remember reading Wednesday. It's hard to do that.
It is.
So having a team to lean on. And we have a Facebook group called The Graduates, and they've all graduated from classes with me so that they know how my style is just a little bit different, but it's recognizable as Love and Logic.
Tell us a little bit more about what the classes are like and how people can work with you.
Well, there's a lot of different options with classes, and there's a lot of different ways to work with me. And I always say learn with me, because honestly, even if I'm doing an hour session at a church or at a school or at a childcare center, I'm learning right along with you, because as I'm talking, I'm processing. Like, I've learned some new connections with you today, for sure, that I'm going to kind of sit down and mull over. But generally, the courses are a 6-session class. Again, we can't learn math in a weekend. So we generally do them once a week. And like, I have a class coming up right now that Jackson County is sponsoring some of their foster care families, kinship kids. I forget the acronym. I should probably know that. But they're going to pay for that. And I'm opening it up. So if you go to the Parenting Professor on Facebook, you'll see the flyer pinned right to the top. It'll tell you more about what the classes entail. But the first thing is we have to end the arguments with kids, because if kids learn that they can control the volume of our voice, and they learn that they can argue us into submission, that's not healthy power for kids to have. So we learn how to stop that, because the best techniques will fall flat if we slip up and kids think that they can argue with us. So that's class 1. And then it goes all the way through empathy and guiding kids to own and solve problems, and techniques like the uh-oh song, and why it's important to delay consequences, and oh my gosh, a lot of other things like potty training and the bedtime blues, and just
it is great stuff. And I found that it is kind of next level. And so, when I was going through some issues, and my son's anxiety a lot of times manifested as anger when he was 12, 13 years old, and lots of power struggles. And I appreciated that additional content there too about being able to kind of support them. And I'll just throw in a plug too, that what I love about Love and Logic is it really fits the whole gamut of age groups, that everything can be modified from, whether it's a 2-year-old, a 12-year-old to a 22-year-old. And like I said, there's some of this I've been able to use in the workplace or in other relationships, like letting people solve their own problems. It doesn't have to be my problem, for example, or I have noticed, it was interesting where immediately, and I actually thought of you, because it was like, okay, Love and Logic, how am I going to do this?
Right.
Because the cop had actually called me to talk about this morning. It was before school, and I'm like, I'm not going to text him. I'm not going to call my son. He's just going to sit and stew in this, all day long. And so not me jumping in, and also not me determining immediately the consequences. It became more of a conversation about, those kind of things. So, and, hopefully this is a screw up with not much of a consequence right now, but certainly could have some bigger ones later. But so it works, for teens too.
And it works because of you building authentic, non-manipulative relationships with kids. And the reason why Love and Logic really works from birth until is because it's not a system. It's a set of principles that guide us how to work with people, really. And it's about leading. I don't know. I don't know how long we want to go here, but
that's okay.
There's so much to talk. Maybe we need a part 2 or something.
We can definitely follow up with a part 2, and I will put some of Chris's contact information in the show notes here as well.
Oh, awesome.
so that you can have a link and some information there. Any final thoughts for today, Chris?
Well, you mentioned part 2, but I don't know if you wanted to tackle this, and we could talk about it off air too, but maybe people reach out to you or me and say, hey, let's tackle like 3 or 4 different topics.
Mm-hmm.
Like it could be as simple as potty training, or it could be as difficult as body image stuff.
We can chat more off air and do some follow-up there as well, and get some feedback and response from this episode too.
The vision, and my vision is really simple, and that's to influence the development of the next generations of world-class citizens. We have the raw materials to do it. We have the knowledge to do it. We just, like you said right away at the beginning, we do what we know, and we just need to change some skills, right? Mm-hmm. We need to change some of our skills and really start thinking about big picture societal stuff. Not to downplay the importance of getting an A in, physics class, but that's just a small drop in the bucket of raising great people. And the other tagline, if you look on my Facebook page, I just say I'm a husband and a dad trying to do my best. So I'm not an expert. I learn right along with you. It's just generally, I'm just a few years ahead of the people that I work with the most. So
very good.
Thank you so much. This is fun.
Yeah, so thank you so much for talking today.
Thank you for listening to the Stop Overthinking podcast with Kristen Odegaard. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone else who would benefit from the message. To learn more about working with me and links to social media and free resources, head over to my website, coachwithkristen.com. That's Kristen spelled Kristen. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss future episodes. Have a great week.